Turning now to an international conflict, North Korea's foreign minister has warned that his country is ready to shoot down American military planes, even if they're not in North Korean airspace. Tensions have been escalating as both countries have threatened the other with military action. We talk next with UC Berkeley's John Yoo. His new book, Striking Power: How Cyber, Robots, and Space Weapons Change the Rules for War, devotes a chapter to the question of North Korea. And Professor Yoo also served in the Bush administration's Justice Department as well. He joins us now. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So the U.S. approach against North Korea has been primarily relying on economic sanctions. Where would new technologies, the types that you're talking about in your book, robotics, for example, cyber, where would that fit into the current strategy?
The problem that our presidents have had for more than 20 years is they've been stuck between essentially appeasement, bribery, paying off North Korea, and having to consider a war that would kill millions of people in South Korea and 30,000 troops and hundreds of thousands of Americans who live in South Korea. And so, as you say, we've tried to fill that gap between those tragic choices with sanctions, which have not been really working. And so new technologies, I think, offer ways to coerce North Korea to punish it, prevent it, but to raise the costs for having a program in nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles as they've been building.
And how so? Can you explain?
Yeah. So defensively, where technology I think could be first applied would be to build a more complete missile defense system in that region. Our missile defense system right now is relatively primitive, and it's built to shoot down missiles at the hardest point, which is when they're re-entering the atmosphere and heading towards the United States. That's the hardest time. That's called the terminal phase for a reason of ballistic missile launch. What you want to do is try to shoot them at the boost phase when they're first taking off. We've all seen the videos when a missile is first taking off. It's really slow. It's trying to defeat gravity. That is the easiest time to see the missile and to shoot it down. Okay. So high technology would allow us to put sea vessels, drones around North Korean airspace and to shoot the missiles at that point.
And so more broadly speaking, if you're looking at conflicts around the world, right, Syria, Iraq, where is the future of war headed then, if you're talking about all these new technologies?
So the interesting thing about technology is we see the effects of similar technologies all around us in the economy with self-driving cars, Amazon, drones, and so on, that have the similar effects in war, we think. In Striking Power, we argue wars can become more precise and less destructive. Think of the drones we've already seen, where they can fire missiles at precise targets based on real-time intelligence using space. Future drones are going to be even smaller, cheaper, more precise, and so you're going to have less harm to civilians, and hopefully it'll head off broader wars. If nations are able to use drones and cyber against each other now in lower intensity conflicts with less destruction, it might convince them to head off a path to a major war.
But you know, critics, there are many, including human rights advocates, who point out that don't you run the risk here of having this lead to more provocation and things getting out of control? Because robots, for example, lack a moral conscience. They don't have accountability. They don't have responsibility for their decisions.
There's two kinds of criticism. I think they're both valid. I don't think they should stop us from developing and deploying these weapons, but one is war's too cheap and easy now. If you can send a drone and there's no casualties that our soldiers are going to suffer, then presidents are going to start sending drones to solve every problem. And then a second problem, this is one more that people like Elon Musk signed a letter of the 100 tech CEOs just last month calling for a ban on these kinds of weapons, is somehow we're going to lose control, and it's going to be like the Terminator movies where the robots will actually take over and seize authority over war from us and might even turn the weapons against us. I think that's science fiction. I've seen all those movies. They're great movies, but I think so far there's no evidence or proof that that would actually happen. Should we give up all the gains in lower death, lower destruction, more precision to war, hopefully less wars, because we're worried about some far-off future where robots are going to take over?
Let me ask you something else, also related to Asia, right? President Trump is going to be making a trip to Asia in November. You authored the so-called torture memos during the Bush administration. You've long advocated for largely unchecked presidential power in times of crisis. And North Korea, we may be heading toward a crisis. What are your feelings about that now with President Trump in office? Do you still think that a president should have unchecked presidential power?
I do. I'm not a personal supporter of President Trump. I was actually quite critical of him during the campaign. I do think, though, that is why we have a president, is because a legislature, 535 people, can't make decisions quickly enough and I think correctly enough in time of crisis. And so that's why our framers created the presidency, is because, yes, a president can make mistakes. Obviously, we have a history of that. Every country that has had histories of their individual leaders making mistakes. But in times of crisis and emergency, like in North Korea, our framers thought it's better for there to be one person who can act quickly, because emergencies are so unpredictable and the damage to our country can be so great.
So would you feel comfortable applying that thought that you had during the Bush administration to the Trump administration? That is, in times of crisis, the president should have unchecked powers, that he can bypass the Constitution.
Well, I think it's all limited by the Constitution. I just think the Constitution gives the president that role on behalf of the country. He is the branch, or she is the branch of the government that has to respond quickest. And in times of emergency, when national security is at stake, yes, I think the president has the right to use the force of the country to stop those kinds of threats. I took that view, I took that view under President Obama. I took that view. I think that's what made Abraham Lincoln a great president. I think that is what made FDR a great president, that ability to rise to circumstance. I would hope that President Trump, if faced something in North Korea or Iran, would put aside these petty differences and stop tweeting about the NFL and rise to the, the responsibility of his great office.
All right. I want to ask you also about the free speech debate, because you teach at UC Berkeley, and this week Attorney General Jeff Sessions weighed in, urging what he calls a recommitment to free speech on campus, and basically saying that protesters are shutting down speeches that don't conform to their views. Do you agree with Mr. Sessions?
I agree with the diagnosis. I don't know what his course of treatment is. I think you have seen in the last year or two speakers, primarily conservative, being shouted down, prevented from speaking, interference with the right of the free speech groups, the free speech rights of the groups that invited them, and of the students and faculty to hear them. Personally, at Berkeley, I think a lot of this is being caused by people who are not students. Most of the students I know at Berkeley, they want to hear both sides. They're adults. I trust them to make up their own minds. I don't want their education to be just listen to an echo chamber. That's not why we should send our kids to college, and that's why our colleges are the greatest ones in the world, is because we have free expression of ideas. I think the university has a duty and obligation to stop interference with free speech rights of anybody who's speaking on campus.
Let's talk about immigration. Version 3 of President Trump's travel ban now includes 8 countries, and among the added ones, North Korea and Venezuela. What do you think of the latest ban?
I think version 1.0 was unconstitutional because it was seemed to be aimed at Muslim countries and Muslims only. Version 3.0, now that it includes Venezuela and North Korea, does not seem aimed at religion. I think it'll pass constitutional muster, except if President Trump says or does something that raises questions in the minds of judges that he has some kind of racial or religious bias against Muslims. So if he can just stop tweeting for a little bit, he might win in court.
Good luck with that. All right, UC Berkeley Law Professor John Yoo, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.